In this video, we'll be taking a look at the various pronouns, particles, and prepositions you find in Biblical Hebrew. Pronouns are simply words that take the place of a noun. Rather than repeat a noun over and over, they stand in the place of that noun using a way to reference that noun without having to repeat it. In English, we have personal pronouns like I, you, he and she, they, we. We also have possessive pronouns, his, her, my, our. These pronouns show possession of things or possession of other nouns. We don't normally think of them as pronouns as such, but we do have demonstrative pronouns such as this, that, these, and those. This presentation that you are watching, that homework you should be doing. We have relative pronouns, words that introduce relative clauses such as that and which. And we have interrogative pronouns, who, what, that introduce questions or interrogative statements. In each of these cases, these pronouns can function exactly like nouns do, and they can be either subjects or objects of a sentence. In terms of the possessive pronouns, they can act as a genitive noun, a noun showing possession. Pronouns are really then made up of two parts: the pronoun itself and the antecedent of the pronoun, that is, what the pronoun is replacing. In these two sentences, Moses struck the rock, he hit it with the staff. Obviously, because one is personal and one is impersonal, we know that he is standing in for Moses, it is standing in for rock. Like nouns, pronouns have number and gender. So if we look back, in that case, Moses is a masculine singular noun. In the Hebrew it would be, at least. He would be the third person masculine singular pronoun. And there we can see the singular pronouns. We've got a first common singular, a second masculine singular, a second feminine singular, a third masculine singular, and a third feminine singular. So they have that within them, like verbs do, person as well as number and gender. Here are the various plural pronouns. Again, first common plural, second masculine plural, second feminine plural, third masculine plural, and third feminine plural. The interesting thing about these independent pronouns, these pronouns that stand alone in Hebrew, they will never be used as the object of a sentence or a clause. They will only be used as the subject. So none of these you will ever find in the accusative function. You will only find them in the nominative function. That is for all the independent personal pronouns in Hebrew. Hebrew also has demonstrative pronouns, which pretty much parallel our own with the inclusion of gender. So they is the near masculine singular. That would be this. The plural for that is these. Zot would be the near feminine. You'll notice that the plural masculine and plural feminine are the same form there. And then we have the far demonstrative pronouns. That is the things we refer to that we can kind of think of as spatially further away than the near thing. So as opposed to this chair and that chair, this chair is much closer than that chair in our mind. You'll also notice that the singular far pronouns in the demonstrative are the same as the personal pronouns. So that can stand for he or it, she or it, as well as that in both the masculine and the feminine. Demonstrative pronouns in Hebrew, just like they do in English, can also be used as adjectives. So, ish ze would be this man. It matches in number and in gender. That is the masculine singular demonstrative pronoun. Isha zot, this woman. So in both those cases, that demonstrative pronoun is acting as an adjective. Like other Hebrew adjectives, they are following the noun they modify. These are the interrogative pronouns. They are always used to introduce a question of some type. Like English, these interrogative pronouns tend to begin the sentence for you, and so they tend to be fronted in the sentence so that you don't have to guess, where's the interrogative pronoun, is it going to come up, is it not? It'll be right up there up front, and so it, in most cases will match the Hebrew syntax for that. The relative pronoun is a very common feature of Hebrew. It's one of the, I believe, 10 most common words in biblical Hebrew, and that is asher, highlighted in red there. In this sentence, I am the Lord your God who brought you from the land, it goes on, of Egypt, but that asher word in this case is translated as who, introducing a relative clause modifying, in this case, the Lord your God. I am the Lord your God. Well, which one? Well, the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. That asher, we only have one relative pronoun in Hebrew, and so it can have a number of different meanings or really translations that, because we have several relative pronouns in English, so we could say, well, which one's working best here? I am the Lord your God that brought you from the land of Egypt. Well, that makes sense, but because Lord your God is personal, who sounds a little bit better. It's a little bit more precise. It's context that's going to dictate which of those words fits the translation best, but just know that asher clause, that asher word often introduces a relative clause. It is very useful when you start mapping out the logical flow of a sentence. That's going to be a big marker for you. That's going to be a big thing that you can kind of go, okay, this is going to be a separate clause, and it's going to be underneath my main clause. This is going to be a relative or a subordinate clause that somehow modifies something in the main clause. So keep an eye out for that word. It's also oftentimes very useful for exegetical purposes. It has an alternate form in which it's just a shin with a segol underneath it that is actually appended to words in Hebrew. You probably won't come across it that often unless you're working in the poetic texts. We can see this example from Song of Solomon. It's used frequently in Ecclesiastes and Job. So you probably won't see that as much, but know that that is a relative pronoun just like asher is. This is just the appended form of it. So we've looked at the independent personal pronouns. Those are pronouns that stand apart from any other word. We also have in Hebrew pronominal suffixes. And these are pronouns, again reflecting person, number, and gender, but they are suffixes that are appended to other words. They're added on. This is where we can get the genitive and the accusative function from pronouns. If a pronominal suffix is added on to a noun, it becomes possessive. It turns into a genitive pronoun, and so it shows possession of the noun that it's appended to. If it's appended to a verb, a direct object marker, or to a preposition, it will be in the accusative, and so that will show that that pronoun is being used as the object either of the verb, of the clause as a whole, or the object of a preposition. These are the various pronominal suffixes. Again, logos will identify these for you. They'll actually identify them and let you know their person, number, and gender, as well as the full independent personal pronoun that they are derived from. And so Don't worry about identifying them, just know that Logos will do that for you. They have both Type 1 and Type 2, which reflects the different uses, which we'll look at in just one moment for pronominal suffixes. The Type 1 suffixes typically go on singular nouns, not describing the number of the pronoun, but describing the number of the noun they are modifying. And so, Susi would be my horse, just one horse. Susa, however, would be my horses. Let's jump out of the slideshow very quickly and look at 1 Kings in Logos to see an example of this as it goes back and forth in a passage. So we've got 1 Kings 22, verse 4 pulled up. We'll be looking at these words right here. And it's the two kings talking and demonstrating their common bond and common goals with each other. We're looking at these last two words. In the English we see, my horses as your horses. He's basically saying, I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. Well, if we mouse over this right here, it will show us, we've got our root there, sus. Well, first we've got a preposition, which we'll learn in just a few moments. After that, we've got sus, there's our noun, and after that, it actually gives us the full first person common singular pronoun as its form, when really all we've got here is the pronominal suffix. So that is what Logos is going to do for you. It's going to identify these pronominal suffixes for you. And this one, of course, is the second person masculine singular. So, as my horses, as your horses, if it's literally translated there. So that is the pronominal suffixes in action there. Let's return to our slideshow and get into prepositions so we know what that kaf appended to the front of that word was. Prepositions, as a grammatical unit, demonstrate a relationship between various words and phrases. Now, these relationships can be spatial, they can be temporal, they can be conceptual. In our first sentence there, he went into the house. That defines where he is going. That is defining a spatial relationship between our subject, he, whoever that might be, and this house. He went into the house. He went out of the house. He went around the house. He jumped over the house. He dug under the house. All those are prepositions, and they describe a spatial relationship between these two, this noun, or this pronoun and this noun. This relationship can also be temporal in terms of relationship through time. We gathered the fruit after it had become ripe. We could have gathered the fruit before it had become ripe. We could have been gathering the fruit while it was becoming ripe. These are all temporal relationships showing a relationship between an action, a gathering, and another action, a becoming ripe, and it defines the relationship in between those two actions. I put conceptual there because they told us about their trip. Well, that's not really a spatial or a temporal relationship, it's just sort of conceptual. They told us the events of their trip. They told us about it. These are our most common prepositions in Hebrew. They are the appended prepositions that are attached while our pronominal suffixes are added to the ends of words. These are added to the beginning of them. We saw one just a second ago, that kaf with the schwa underneath it, but now we've got two more. The bait with the schwa underneath it can be translated as in, by, or with. There's actually a lot more. If you pulled up a lexicon entry on that, there's going to be a lot of different entries for that. This is one place that various Hebrew grammars will come in very handy in defining some of these prepositions and the potential uses that they have. The kaf with the schwa underneath it, like or as, again, many more translations for that, and then the lamed with a schwa underneath it. All those are called the appended prepositions, and they are the most common type. Again, very, very common. I think top 10, words used in Hebrew. Not quite as much as the vowel conjunction, but pretty close. These are the makef prepositions, so called because they are appended to words using the makef, that little dash that floats high up with the letters there. These are some of the more common ones. There's several more. There's about 30, I believe, but you'll see these most commonly all, on, upon, or concerning, el, to, or toward. Many times you'll say, see a verb follow the verb and he said followed with el and whoever they were speaking to. So, and he said to his brothers. El is used very common in that case. Ad being until or as far as. A common expression in the Hebrew Bible is ad olam, until eternity, or as far as eternity, meaning forever and ever. Kind of that infinite temporal relationship between, most often describing God. And lastly, min, which means from. It can also be used in a comparative sense. You can see it used in Genesis 37 when it says that Israel loved Israel loved Joseph. Really, literally, it says from all his brothers. But the way we translate that is Israel loved Joseph more than all his brothers, or above all his brothers. And so that's a common use of that preposition there. One preposition that from time to time may throw us off, because I did point out to you that we do have an accusative marker or a direct object marker that looks just like this preposition. In some cases, this word, which looks exactly the same, aleph, tsere, tav, will be used as a preposition that means with or beside. And so that's something just to keep an eye out for. They look exactly the same. Context can help you a lot. Logos can help you a lot with that as well, because it'll indicate one or the other in many of those cases, whether you're looking at a preposition or whether you're looking at a direct object, because both of them can take pronominal suffixes. So that's something just that can sometimes confuse beginning students of Hebrew, but logos will guide the way for us. These are some of the independent prepositions, some of the more common ones, under, after, and between, that you'll see. They're treated just like any other word in the Hebrew Bible. You'll mouse over it, or you'll put on your visual filter or something, and it'll say preposition. It'll give you a meaning for it. You can look it up in the lexicon. It'll give you a couple of the nuances or glosses that may come out of that. Between is used frequently, doubly. Many times they will say, may the Lord judge between you and between me. We just say between you and me in English, but in Hebrew oftentimes they double the use of that preposition. Lastly, we're just going to look at kind of the errata of Hebrew, these various morphological features, these letters that or particles that are used that don't really fit into any of the categories we've looked so far as parts of speech, and so it's kind of getting dumped into the junk drawer here at the end of this presentation. But they're all very useful to know, and so I will present them to you now. One is the interrogative particle. This is essentially the Hebrew question mark. It is a hey with a hatef patak underneath it. It is appended to the first word of a clause, and it will make that clause into a question. For instance, the first one, if it was simply shomer ahi anoki, it would be I am keeping my brother. But with the interrogative particle added to the front of it, it becomes a question. Am I the one keeping my brother? Or, as it's more popularly translated, am I my brother's keeper? Likewise, we've got the Joseph's brothers asking him this incredulous question, will you indeed rule over us? If we took off that interrogative particle on the front, they'd be making a declarative statement. You will indeed rule over us. But with the question, it becomes, will you indeed rule over us? This is the directional particle. It looks very much like the feminine ending that we are used to now on both feminine singular nouns as well as the third feminine singular verbs. And it is a kamets and hey, but what it means, if it's added on to these words, is that there is indicating a direction towards something. There may not even be a verb there, but in this case, Mitzrayimah would mean towards Egypt or to Egypt. There is a common expression, they bow down, Eretzah, to the ground or to the earth, or they fell down to the ground or to the earth. And so that just shows a towards direction for whatever it is appended to. And Logos identifies it as such. It says this is a directional particle, that you won't confuse it with anything else because Logos will identify it for you. Hine is another one of those incredibly common Hebrew words, and most commonly translated, it is behold. It draws the attention of the reader to whatever's following it. And so it's kind of wake up, behold, look at what I'm talking about, listen to what I'm saying, look at what I'm showing you. In fact, it's used so commonly that sometimes it is left untranslated. If you want to look at a case of this, you can look at the account of Joseph's dreams as he's telling them to his brothers. Every sentence he actually begins, behold, hine, behold, we were in the field, behold, my sheaf stood up, and behold, yours gathered around and bowed down to it. I don't know if his brothers were simply annoyed by the content of the story, or the fact his brother kept saying, behold, behold, behold. These particles that I've got highlighted in red here are particles of existence and non-existence. And we can actually see two contrasting ideas right here. In the first, Yesh Elohim means there is a God. That Yesh, that Yod, Sere, Shin, appended to the front of Elohim is the particle of existence. And it can be simply translated as there is. There is a God. Likewise, there's a particle of non-existence, een. And there we have the statement of the fool from Psalms 14, there is not a God. So we can see those two words, we call it the particle of existence and non-existence. It can be used in a less absolute way. For instance, when Reuben goes back to look for Joseph after he's been put in the pit, he says, and Joseph was not in the pit, using this particle of non-existence. Joseph still existed, he just didn't exist in the pit any longer. These are particles of negation. When we add these to the front of a sentence, it makes whatever that statement is negative. And so, in that example from Genesis 2:17, Tokal Mimenu, that would mean, if we simply said the words in black there, you shall eat from the tree, or you will eat from it. That's an imperfect, and so it would be with a future tense translation there, you will eat from it. But with the lo, this negative particle added to the front of it, it makes that negative. You shall not eat from it. You will not eat from it. Likewise, al can be used to negate something. That's another imperfect. That's tira would mean be fearful, or really, you will be fearful. in that imperfect translation. But with all appended to the front of it, it means you will not be fearful. It negates the statement that follows it. There is some nuance between these. Lo is typically used for a permanent prohibition. You shall not do this, and you shall never do this. You see it more. You see it in lo used in the Ten Commandments, whereas al is typically used for a momentary prohibition. Right now, don't fear. Right now, don't do this. It's restricting an immediate action, not a persistent action. Just two more particles to look at. Key is kind of like share in the sense that it very often introduce a subordinate clause, but with a lot more nuance to it. For instance, in this case, we see the remainder of Genesis 2:17, and it actually becomes causal, I should say. This is actually showing the result of that earlier prohibition we saw. You shall not eat from it, or you shall surely die. Or, for on the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. This is given the reason behind that earlier prohibition. This key clause can simply be translated in this case for or because. Because on the day of you eat of it, because on the day you eat of it, you will surely die. So, as I noted there, one grammar gives 14 different uses for key. And so when you're exegeting things, when you're looking at the structure of a text, when you're writing out main clauses and subordinate clauses, this is a big marker that you want to pay attention to, because oftentimes this will give you important information just by seeing that word on the structure of the passage you're looking at. Another very common particle is im. It is primarily used conditionally, so it means if. For instance, in this passage from Genesis 15, God says to Abram, number the stars if you're able to number them. It's used in other ways as well. Those are things that you can go to the lexicon and look up. You can also look at your grammars to look that up and see what the various uses of these particles are, because Logos will identify them very well for you, but oftentimes it will be up to you to really figure out how these words are being used. And that's going to be context, that's going to be logic, that's going to be looking at what's going around these particles with the verbs and the nouns and the pronouns that surround these particles, and the flow of the sentence. What can we determine that these particles like im and key mean, and what are they conveying through their use?